In the history of the highest level of college football, the longest game ever played took a total of 7 overtimes to decide the winner. In fact, there have been 5 such games to go this length, most recently between LSU and Texas A&M. And as you'd expect, each of these games was extremely high scoring, except for one, the 2006 matchup between North Texas and FIU. This scoreline is pretty low even for a regular game standards, so how could a game with 7 overtimes only produce this many points? Trust me, this is one of the most bizarrely bad games you'll ever hear about. Here's what happened. In 7 overtime periods, there was not a single offensive touchdown. In fact, neither team was really all that close. Then on top of that, those 14 possessions saw an unprecedented 8 missed field goals. Seriously, you could barely call this a college football game. What's also wild about this was since college football got rid of the ability for teams to tie at this level back in 1996, North Texas was the only school that had not experienced an overtime game. And after going 10 years without one, this is what happened. Then for FIU, this wasn't even their most memorable game that season. That came the following week against Miami.
This is ugly. Very ugly.
Hello, and welcome to episode 2 of a new series, the M.U.F.S. This is where, instead of my normal style with one topic, I take multiple smaller stories and piece them together into one video. In this episode, we have football games that went longer than 7 overtimes, crowds being penalized for being too loud, and the quarterback who set a record not even Nathan Peterman could dream of. I will get to all these stories. But first, today's video is sponsored by Sleeper. Sleeper is a modern fantasy experience designed to connect people over sports with its integrated chat and sleek interface. Want a fantasy experience where other users actually smack talk and really get into it? That's exactly what you get with Sleeper, which also happens to be the fastest growing fantasy platform on the market, with millions of users built almost entirely on word of mouth. Sleeper offers fantasy NFL, NBA, even League of Legends, and it gives you control over your fantasy draft and season. Redraft, Dynasty, Best Ball, however you want to play. Sleeper is made for you. And perhaps the best part of all is that Sleeper is free and has 0 ads. It's just an authentic, true fantasy experience. So to get started, click the link in the description to download the Sleeper app to your mobile device and get drafting to start your fantasy season. So as the title of the video says, let's go over the longest games from the pro level down to high school. During the regular season in the National Football League, if a game goes the length of 1 overtime, it ends in a tie. However, in the playoffs, if no winner has been decided by the end of overtime, the game will then enter a second period of overtime. It's extremely rare. In the entire history of the NFL playoffs, there have only been 6 games to enter double OT. Most recently in 2013 with the Ravens and the Broncos. As far as the longest of these 6 games, that took place between the Chiefs and Dolphins in 1971. The game clock ran for 82 minutes and 40 seconds. To some of you, that may not sound like a lot, but when you're talking about 70s style football, that extra 22 minutes would have been brutal. One player was so exhausted following the game, he walked straight into the shower with his clothes on. This game also took place on Christmas Day, so talk about one of the games that fans will remember forever. Now, as most of you know, the overtime rules are different from the pro level compared to college and high school. At those lower levels, the rules allow both teams a possession from the 25-yard line going in. This format is considered more fair, but it does have the chance to keep games going way too long. Like I said during the intro, there were 5 FBS games that went into 7 overtimes. But if you include all levels of college football, then there was a game between Bethune-Cookman and Virginia State that went into 8 overtimes. This one was wild. Bethune-Cookman led 26-3 in the third quarter, but they blew that lead. Then in the 7th overtime, Bethune-Cookman blocked a field goal attempt, and Damian Cook scooped it up and was going to return it to the house. As he was running it back for the walk-off touchdown, he dove for the end zone, but landed a few yards short. This would have been hilarious to see, and he received the nickname Big Dive following the game. Overall, This 8 overtime marathon lasted just under 5 hours. Lastly, let's take a look at high school. A game between Jacksonville High and Nacogdoches High began at 7:30, and 5.5 hours later, just before 1 in the morning, this game ended after 12 overtimes. The reason it went so long was mainly due to an odd rule in the high school rulebook. The Doches needed to win by at least 8 points to qualify for the playoffs. So when they reached overtime, they did have multiple chances to win the game. But because they were trying to win by 8 points specifically, they started doing weird things like if their opponent failed to score, they would decide to throw the ball out of the end zone to extend the game. It was annoying. Coaches were pretty upset about it afterwards. What was funny about this game though was despite how high scoring it was, it didn't set the Texas state record for points. Instead, the official game that holds the record was a 186-0 massacre. Wow. So now, we've looked at the longest games in football history. Let's jump into the second topic of this video. Recently, I became fascinated by UCF because of their rise from nothing and how volatile their football team has been in recent years. Throughout their early years, they defied the odds over and over. For example, they set the attendance record for Division III in their very first season of organized football. They also became the first school to move up 4 NCAA divisions, which took them less than 20 years. During that stretch of time, there is one moment that stands out above the rest, and it's perhaps the most famous game in Division II history. In 1988, UCF hosted Troy State, who was the #1 ranked school in the country for Division II. Troy State had been the team to beat in recent years, as they had taken home 2 national titles in the last 5 seasons. UCF was having quite the season of their own, ranked 3rd in the country. This was easily the biggest matchup in the history of their program, and the hype was tremendous. A then record 31,789 fans showed up for this highly anticipated matchup. In the third quarter of that game, the fans were so loud, Troy State's quarterback complained to the ref that he couldn't hear anything.
Now he's not. Godsey was persistent that time, just saying, hey, listen, I cannot hear. There's no way I can.
After warning the crowd a few times about this, the referee charged UCF a timeout because of the crowd noise. This game now is famously known as the noise penalty game. UCF went on to win. Interestingly enough, there was an official rule, at least at the NFL level. This rule could penalize a team with a 5-yard penalty or a timeout if there was excessive crowd noise. This happened from time to time, and it was evident throughout the 1980s. But what do you do about screaming crowds? Especially considering that they get louder when the opponents are showing them that they can't hear.
The other. Getting quiet so we can get a play. This is a good job.
There's just not much you can do. So teams had to adapt to the crowd noise with radios in the helmets and better play calling through the use of signs and numbers from the sidelines. This is where football started to see faster tempo offenses and the more modern way of play style that we see today. Alright, so to wrap up this video, let's take a look at one of the most infamous records in college football history. This takes us back to 1969. Midway through the college football season, Florida traveled to Auburn to face the Tigers. This was a pretty hype matchup considering both teams were loaded and 2 of the top schools in the nation at the time. Young sophomore John Reeves was the quarterback at Florida. He was in his first year starting, and he was having a decent season thus far, but Auburn's defense proved to be a nightmare. To say that Reeves struggled would be an understatement. He threw pick after pick after pick. By the end of the game, Reeves had tallied up 9 interceptions. I don't know what's crazier, the fact that he threw this many picks, or that the coach didn't bench him. You'd think Reeves was probably just some scrub quarterback who never amounted to much after that, right? Well, this is pretty ironic. The year he threw 9 picks in one game, he was an all-conference quarterback next to Archie Manning. Then he eventually went on to become an All-American. Amazingly, 2 years following that horrendous game, he was one of the most hyped prospects, becoming a first-round pick in the NFL draft.
time. Stays in the pocket. He's got the first down. That is to Larry Brown.